London society thrives on vicious secrets. Beneath glittering chandeliers of Mayfair, aristocrats auction off their unwanted wards to highest bidders. Whispers filled crowded ballrooms when Duke of Harrington arrived. Everyone expected him to choose a beautiful debutante, a flawless diamond. Instead, he pointed his cane toward a shivering, ash-covered girl huddled in shadows. Cruel stepmothers and greedy lords laughed, thinking he made a fool's choice. They were terribly wrong. This seemingly broken girl concealed a dangerously powerful truth. Unlocking her secrets would entirely destroy an empire's foundation and ignite a scandalous, unforgiving romance. The year was 1816, and a biting chill had descended upon London, matching the cold, mercantile hearts of the aristocrats gathered in the clandestine basement beneath a supposedly reputable gentlemen's club near St. James's Street, while the rest of high society danced under the watchful eyes of patronesses at Almack's. A much darker, far more transactional gathering was taking place out of sight. This was an underground marriage mart, a place where debt-ridden lords and desperate stepmothers essentially auctioned off the matrimonial rights of their burdensome wards to settle staggering gambling debts accrued at Brooks's or White's. Arthur Sterling, the Duke of Harrington, stood in the shadows near the back of the damp, cigar-smoke-filled room. He was a man of immense power, formidable wealth, and a reputation that danced dangerously between revered and feared. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the colour of a stormy winter sea, Arthur possessed a sharp intellect that had served the crown well during the Napoleonic Wars. Now he found himself navigating the treacherous waters of peacetime politics. He had come tonight not for a wife, but on a rumour from his political ally, Lord Palmerston, who suspected a ring of French spies was utilising these underground auctions to launder stolen funds and transport secret correspondence through arranged marriages. Through the haze of smoke, Arthur observed the sordid spectacle. Lords with bloated faces and stained cravats bid on trembling young women whose dowries had been squandered, or whose lineages were deemed too obscure for the light of a Mayfair ballroom. Then his gaze fell upon Lady Beatrice Montgomery. Lady Beatrice was a widow of notorious greed, a woman whose extravagant lifestyle had driven her late husband's estate to the brink of ruin. Beside her stood her two biological daughters dressed in the finest silks, though they were merely spectators to tonight's business. The true commodity was standing behind them, effectively hidden from casual view. It was a girl, or rather a hunched, wretched-looking creature dressed in an ill-fitting, mud-brown gown that seemed constructed from discarded curtains. Her hair was a tangled, matted mess of dull brown, plastered to her forehead, and her face was smudged with what looked like actual hearth soot. Heavy, thick-lensed spectacles rested awkwardly on her nose, obscuring her eyes, and she walked with a pronounced, painful limp. The crowd around her parted, with a mixture of pity and disgust. Whispers echoed over the clinking of brandy glasses. They called her the Montgomery Toad, a cruel moniker for a girl deemed entirely unmarriageable. Arthur narrowed his eyes. Something was profoundly wrong with the tableau. Lady Beatrice was a woman who prized aesthetics above all else. It was well known she employed the same tailors as Beau Brummel. Why would she allow a member of her household, even a despised stepdaughter, to appear in public looking like a scullery maid dragged through the gutters of Covent Garden? The auctioneer, a greasy man named Silas Cobb, banged his gavel. Next, we have the ward of Lady Beatrice Montgomery. Miss Genevieve. She comes with a modest dowry, but a strong back and an obedient nature." The crowd erupted in mocking laughter. Lord Foley, a decrepit baron in his 60s, known for his cruel temper and decaying teeth, stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "I'll give you £50 for the wretched thing, Beatrice. I need a girl to scrub the floors at my country estate, and she looks like she wouldn't distract the footman." Genevieve flinched at the baron's voice. Underneath the soot, the hideous dress, and the deliberately tangled hair, she was trembling, but not entirely from fear. It was from the agonizing effort of maintaining her disguise. Genevieve knew exactly why she was here. Lady Beatrice was bankrupting the estate, and Genevieve was the only obstacle left. Genevieve's late father, a wealthy French exile who had anglicized his name, had hidden the deeds to immense overseas shipping fortunes and the ciphers to access his banking vaults. Lady Beatrice believed the secret was hidden in Genevieve's belongings, but Genevieve carried the complex numerical ciphers safely within her own exceptionally gifted mind. Beatrice had spent the last 4 years systematically destroying Genevieve's reputation, forcing her to eat in the kitchens, sleep in the drafty attic, and present herself as a disfigured, slow-witted simpleton. The goal was to sell her off to an isolated brute like Foley, who would keep her locked away in the country, legally granting Beatrice control over Genevieve's remaining trust, and ensuring the girl could never claim her rightful inheritance when she came of age. £50 is a start for the ugly duckling, Silas Cobb sneered. "Do I hear 60? 60? Grunted a drunken squire from the corner. 70! Foley barked, stepping closer to Genevieve, his eyes roaming over her hunched form with a sickening sense of ownership. Arthur watched the girl closely. While her body posture was a masterclass in submission, her hands, clutched tightly in front of her, were long, elegant, and completely devoid of the calluses one would expect from a scullery maid. Furthermore, as Foley stepped closer, Genevieve's chin tilted up just a fraction. Behind those thick, distorting lenses, Arthur caught a flash of defiant, luminous green eyes. It was a fleeting moment, gone in a millisecond, but it was enough. The girl was playing a part, a very dangerous, desperate part. £100, Foley declared, slamming his cane down, and I'll take her tonight. Beatrice, sign the papers. Lady Beatrice's eyes gleamed with wicked triumph. She reached for the quill Silas offered. £10,000. The voice cut through the smoky, noisy room like a crack of thunder. The ambient chatter ceased instantly. Heads whipped around, eyes widening in sheer disbelief. Silas Cobb dropped his gavel. Lord Foley choked on his own saliva. Even Lady Beatrice froze, the quill slipping from her jewelled fingers to the floor. Arthur Sterling stepped out of the shadows, his silver-tipped cane clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. He moved with the predatory grace of a wolf entering a pen of startled sheep. The gaslight illuminated his sharp, aristocratic features and the devastatingly cold expression he wore. "Your Grace," Silas stammered, his face draining of colour. The Duke of Harrington was not a man one expected to see in a basement auction of human misery. "I said £10,000, Arthur repeated, his voice smooth, bored, yet lined with an undeniable threat. He did not look at Lady Beatrice, nor did he look at the sneering lords. His tempestuous gaze was locked entirely on Genevieve. Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. £10,000? It was a king's ransom. It was enough to buy a massive estate in the country. Why would the Duke of Harrington, a man rumoured to be the most eligible and ruthless bachelor in the kingdom, bid such an astronomical sum on the Montgomery Toad?" "Your Grace, surely you jest," Lady Beatrice stammered, stepping in front of Genevieve as if to shield her, though her eyes were spinning with the mathematics of the fortune just offered. "The girl is, well, you can see her. She is slow, sickly, and terribly plain. She is not fit for a ducal household." "I am perfectly capable of assessing what is fit for my household, Lady Beatrice," Arthur replied, his tone laced with ice. "The bid stands, unless Lord Foley wishes to counter." Lord Foley shrunk back, his bravado entirely evaporating under the Duke's withering stare. "No, Your Grace. She is all yours." Arthur walked directly up to Genevieve. Up close, she smelled of cheap lye soap and stale ashes. He could see the intricate smudging of the soot on her cheekbones, applied with almost artistic precision to hollow out her face. He reached out, his large warm hand surprisingly gentle as he grasped her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "You will come with me," Arthur commanded quietly, for her ears alone. Genevieve looked up at him through the blurry glass of her fake spectacles. She saw no pity in his eyes, only a sharp, terrifying curiosity. She gave a small, jerky nod, maintaining her trembling facade. "Draw up the contracts, Cobb," Arthur ordered, turning his back on the stunned crowd. "I will have my carriage brought around. The girl leaves with me tonight." The interior of the Duke's carriage was a sanctuary of dark leather, polished mahogany, and the faint masculine scent of sandalwood and expensive port. As the heavy doors clicked shut, sealing them inside, the ambient noise of the London streets was muffled, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence between the two passengers. Genevieve huddled into the furthest corner of the squabs, pulling her ragged brown shawl tighter around her thin shoulders. She kept her head bowed, staring intently at the floorboards, her mind racing with terrified calculations. She had prepared herself for Lord Foley. She knew how to handle a brute. She would have played the simpleton, kept to the shadows, and eventually planned an escape once they were in the country. But the Duke of Harrington was an entirely different equation. He was a statesman, an intellectual, a man whose gaze felt as though it could strip away flesh to examine the bone beneath. Arthur sat opposite her, thoroughly at ease, one long leg stretched out. He did not immediately speak. Instead, he simply watched her. He noted the way her breathing was too controlled for someone who was supposedly terrified out of their wits. He noted that despite her horrific garments, she did not slouch like a beaten servant when she thought he wasn't looking. Her spine possessed an inherent aristocratic straightness. "You may remove those absurd spectacles, Miss Genevieve," Arthur finally said, his voice breaking the silence with the smoothness of aged whiskey. "The carriage is quite dark, and I imagine staring through distorted glass must be giving you a terrible headache." Genevieve stiffened. She forced a pathetic, trembling quaver into her voice. I cannot see without them, Your Grace. My eyes are terrible weak." "Fascinating," Arthur murmured, leaning slightly forward. "Because when Lord Foley raised his cane in the basement, your eyes tracked the movement with the precision of a hawk. Furthermore, the lenses are convex, designed for someone profoundly far-sighted, yet you stared at the floor just inches from your boots with perfect clarity." "Take them off!" Panic flared in Genevieve's chest. He was too observant, too quick. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached up and removed the heavy wire-rimmed glasses, placing them in her lap. She kept her eyes downcast, the thick soot still masking her features. "Better," Arthur said softly. "Now, I am sure you're wondering why I paid £10,000 for you. My stepmother says I'm good for scrubbing grates, your grace, Genevieve whispered, playing the fool. Perhaps you have many grates at your estate. Arthur let out a low, humourless chuckle. I have a staff of 80 at Harrington House, and triple that at my country seat. My grates are perfectly clean. I paid that exorbitant sum, Miss Genevieve, because I despise Lady Beatrice Montgomery, and because I happen to be deeply interested in the late Henri Baptiste, the man who was purportedly your father. Genevieve's breath hitched. She fought the urge to look up, her hands clenching into fists in the folds of her awful skirt. Her father. No one ever spoke of her father. The high society of London considered him a disgraced French exile, a footnote in the Montgomery family's social climb. I had a conversation with Lord Liverpool just yesterday, Arthur continued, his tone casual, though his eyes never left her huddled form. We were discussing the alarming rate at which the Montgomery estate is hemorrhaging funds. Lady Beatrice is practically destitute, yet she struts about Mayfair as if she owns the Bank of England. Rumour has it she is searching for a particular set of documents that unlock a banking fortune so vast it could destabilize current market prices. And yet she was willing to sell you off to a miserable baron for £70. I know nothing of documents, sir, Genevieve said, her voice dropping lower. I believe you, Arthur replied, because if you had the documents, she would have beaten them out of you by now. No, I think the secret isn't in what you possess, Miss Genevieve. I think the secret is you, or what you know. The carriage jolted as it turned onto the wide, elegant expanse of Grosvenor Square, pulling up to the imposing wrought-iron gates of Harrington House. We have arrived, Arthur said, reaching for the door handle as the footman opened it from the outside. He paused, looking back at her. You are safe here. Lady Beatrice will never set foot inside my home. But understand this, I do not tolerate deceit in my household. Whatever game you are playing, whatever mask you are wearing, you will drop it. We will speak again tomorrow. Genevieve was ushered out of the carriage by a bewildered footman who tried valiantly to hide his shock at the filthy, hunched creature the Duke had brought home. She was led through the grand foyer, a breathtaking space of white marble, sweeping staircases, and gilded mirrors. Genevieve kept her eyes on the marble floor, acutely aware of the dirt she was tracking into the pristine environment. A stern, impeccably dressed woman with greying hair awaited them. Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper. Mrs. Hughes, Arthur said, handing his greatcoat to a butler. This is Miss Genevieve. She is my new ward. You will prepare the blue guest suite for her, have a bath drawn immediately, and burn the clothes she is currently wearing. Send to the dressmaker first thing in the morning. Mrs. Hughes's professional composure fractured for a fraction of a second as she took in Genevieve's soot-stained face and matted hair. The blue guest suite, Your Grace? Are you quite certain? I rarely stutter, Mrs. Hughes, Arthur replied coolly. Right away, Your Grace. Mrs. Hughes turned to Genevieve, her expression softening into a mixture of maternal concern and professional duty. Come along, child. Let's get you warmed up. Genevieve followed the housekeeper up the grand staircase. The blue guest suite was massive, decorated in elegant shades of sapphire and cream, with a blazing fire already crackling in the marble hearth. It was larger than the entire ground floor of the Montgomery estate. Now, Mrs. Hughes said gently, gesturing to a copper tub being brought in by 2 sturdy maids, followed by buckets of steaming water. "Let's get those awful rags off you. You must be freezing." Genevieve backed away toward the wall, genuine fear finally breaking through her calculated facade. The dirt, the soot, the hideous clothes. They were her armor. They were what kept her invisible. If she washed them away, if she revealed the face underneath, the Duke would see the undeniable resemblance to her French aristocratic lineage. Worse, if she was clean and presentable, she became a pawn again, a woman who could be used, manipulated, and forced into another social cage. I don't want to bathe," Genevieve stammered, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. "Please, I just want to sleep." Mrs. Hughes frowned, stepping closer. "Nonsense, dear. You smell of the ash pit, and your skin must be itching terribly. No one will hurt you here." The Duke gave strict orders. "No," Genevieve said, her voice rising in a panic. She couldn't lose the disguise. Not yet. She needed to figure out how much the Duke truly knew about her father's ciphers. The commotion had apparently been loud enough to carry out to the hallway. The door opened, and Arthur stepped in, having abandoned his cravat and jacket. He took in the scene, the maids holding towels, Mrs. Hughes looking exasperated, and Genevieve pressed against the floral wallpaper like a cornered animal. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Hughes?" Arthur asked. "The young miss refuses to bathe, Your Grace." Mrs. Hughes sighed. "She seems quite frightened." Arthur waved a hand, dismissing the staff. "Leave us. Leave the water." The maids and housekeeper quickly exited, closing the heavy oak door behind them. Arthur walked slowly toward the fireplace, leaning his arm against the mantel, his imposing figure dominating the elegant room. He stared at Genevieve, who was practically shaking against the wall. "Why are you so terrified of a bar of soap, Miss Genevieve?" he asked, his voice low and probing. "Is it because you are afraid of the water, or are you afraid of what the water will wash away?" Genevieve squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to answer. "Lady Beatrice sold you as an ugly, simple-minded creature," Arthur continued, taking a step toward her. "But I have fought in wars, Genevieve. I know what camouflage looks like. You have painted soot on the hollows of your cheeks to simulate sickness. You walk with a limp that switches from your left leg to your right when you are distracted. You are hiding. And tonight, the hiding ends." The silence in the blue guest suite stretched, taut and fragile. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the gentle lapping of the hot water in the copper tub. Genevieve remained pressed against the wall, her breathing shallow. She recognized the tone of absolute authority in Arthur's voice. It was not a request, it was an ultimatum. "If you prefer," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, devoid of its previous harshness, "I will have Mrs. Hughes return and scrub you down herself. But one way or another, the mud and the lies are coming off tonight in my house. You are no longer under the Montgomery roof. You do not need to make yourself small to survive here." He turned on his heel and walked to the door. "I expect to see you in my study in exactly 1 hour. There is a silk robe in the wardrobe. Do not test my patience, Genevieve." The door clicked shut, leaving her alone with the steaming water and the profound realization that her years of carefully constructed misery were over. Slowly, she pushed herself away from the wall. She walked over to the gilded mirror resting above a vanity table. She stared at her reflection. The girl staring back was a masterpiece of manufactured wretchedness. Beatrice had been meticulous, ensuring Genevieve rubbed ash into her pores every morning, forcing her to wear binding garments that stooped her shoulders. With trembling fingers, Genevieve reached for the collar of the hideous brown dress. She unfastened the crude buttons. The heavy fabric fell to the floor in a sad heap. Next went the coarse linen undergarments. She stepped into the hot, perfumed water. As the warmth enveloped her, a quiet sob broke from her throat. It was the first time in 4 years she had felt clean water against her skin. She picked up the lavender-scented soap and began to scrub. The water quickly turned dark, brown, and murky as layers of grime, soot, and chimney ash melted away. She washed her hair, vigorously scrubbing the tangles and the grease that Beatrice had insisted she apply daily. It took 3 rinses to get the water clear. When Genevieve finally stepped out of the tub and wrapped herself in the heavy plush towel, she felt lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her bones. She walked back to the mirror and wiped away the condensation. The Montgomery Toad was gone. In her place stood a young woman of striking, arresting beauty. She did not possess the soft, round, rosy-cheeked prettiness that was currently fashionable in London society. Instead, she had the sharp, aristocratic bone structure of her French ancestors, high, sweeping cheekbones, a strong jawline, and full, natural lips. Her skin, finally scrubbed clean, was a flawless pale ivory, but it was her eyes that were her most captivating feature. Without the thick, distorting lenses of her fake spectacles, her eyes were large, luminous, and the color of deep emeralds, framed by thick, dark lashes. Her hair, no longer matted and brown, dried into soft, cascading waves of deep, rich mahogany. She opened the wardrobe and found the garment Arthur had mentioned. It was a robe of deep emerald silk, likely belonging to his late mother or sister, beautifully embroidered. She slipped it on, tying the sash tightly around her slender waist. She stood tall, letting her spine straighten, throwing her shoulders back. The limp was gone. The stoop was gone. Exactly 1 hour later, she stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the Duke's ground-floor study. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and knocked. "Enter," came his deep voice. Genevieve pushed the doors open and stepped into the room. It was a magnificent library, walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes smelling of old paper, leather, and citrus. Arthur was seated behind a massive oak desk, reviewing a stack of correspondence. He did not look up immediately. "Sit down, Miss Genevieve. I will be with you in a moment." Genevieve walked across the Persian rug and stood silently before the desk. She did not sit. Arthur signed his name with a flourish on the final letter, set down his quill, and finally looked up. The effect was instantaneous. Arthur Sterling, a man who had stared down enemy cannons at Waterloo without flinching, visibly stopped breathing. The quill he had just set down rolled off the desk and onto the floor, completely ignored. His storm-grey eyes widened, sweeping over her from the top of her mahogany hair to the elegant line of her neck, down to the emerald silk that clung to her form. He had expected the girl beneath the dirt to be passably pretty. He had not expected this breathtaking regal creature standing in his study with a posture that rivaled the Queen's. "Good God," Arthur breathed softly, almost to himself. He stood up slowly, leaning his knuckles against the desk, his eyes locked on hers. "Lady Beatrice was not just hiding you, Genevieve. She was burying you alive." Genevieve held his gaze, her chin high. "My stepmother knew that a woman's beauty is a commodity in Mayfair, Your Grace. If I had been presented to society looking as I do now, I would have attracted suitors. powerful suitors, and Beatrice could not afford for me to have anyone who could advocate for my legal rights. Arthur's eyes narrowed, the shock of her beauty quickly giving way to the sharp machinery of his intellect. Because of your father's fortune? Yes, Genevieve said evenly. My father, Henri Baptiste, did not lose his wealth in the Revolution as society believes. He transferred it to English banks under false names and complex holding companies. Before he died, he created a cipher to access the vaults. Arthur walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from her. The proximity made Genevieve's heart race, though she refused to step back. He was incredibly tall up close, projecting an aura of overwhelming male authority. And Lady Beatrice has been searching for this cipher, Arthur concluded, his voice low, intimate. She tore your rooms apart. She made you miserable, hoping you would break and hand it over. She searched every book, every dress, every floorboard of the Montgomery estate, Genevieve said, a faint, proud smile touching her lips. She is a fool. Why? Because my father was a paranoid man, Genevieve said softly, tapping a slender finger against her own temple. He didn't write it down. He made me memorize it. It is entirely in my head, an algorithm of prime numbers and historical dates. Without me, the fortune is permanently locked. Arthur stared at her, genuinely impressed. The layers were peeling back, revealing a woman of extraordinary resilience and intelligence. To survive 4 years of psychological torture and public humiliation to protect her legacy required a spine of absolute steel. And you are telling me this now? Arthur asked, tilting his head. Why? Why trust me, a man who essentially bought you like a prized mare at a sordid auction? Because, Your Grace, Genevieve replied, her emerald eyes flashing with a daring spark, you bought me for £10,000, which means you are either the most foolish man in England or the only man powerful enough to protect me from Beatrice while I reclaim what is mine. I am gambling on the latter. Arthur laughed, a genuine rich sound that seemed to startle even himself. He stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood wrapping around her. You are a dangerous woman, Genevieve. Only to those who cross me, Your Grace. Before Arthur could reply, the study doors burst open. The butler stood there, looking profoundly flustered. Your Grace, I apologize for the intrusion, but there is a frantic knocking at the front door. It is Lord Palmerston's messenger. He brings urgent news regarding Lady Beatrice Montgomery. She has gone to Bow Street. She is accusing you, Your Grace, of kidnapping. Arthur's jaw tightened, the brief moment of levity vanishing instantly. He looked at Genevieve, his eyes turning hard and resolute. It seems, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, the war has begun. The heavy oak doors of Harrington House had barely been secured against the biting London wind when the sharp, authoritative rapping of the Bow Street runners echoed through the grand foyer. Arthur Sterling did not flinch. He adjusted the cuffs of his snowy linen shirt, his expression hardening into a mask of aristocratic indifference. He turned to Genevieve, whose newfound confidence was suddenly warring with the instinct to flee. Stay here, Arthur commanded, his voice a low, steady rumble that brokered no argument. Do not let anyone see you. I will handle Sir Richard Burney's hounds. He strode out of the study, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. In the foyer, 3 robust men in the distinctive red waistcoats of the Bow Street runners stood awkwardly on the pristine marble, led by a stern-faced senior officer named Inspector Hawkins. Your Grace, Hawkins began, offering a stiff bow that bordered on insolent. We come on the authority of Chief Magistrate Sir Richard Burney. A formal complaint of abduction has been lodged by Lady Beatrice Montgomery. She claims you forcefully removed her ward, Miss Genevieve, from her lawful custody. Arthur descended the final 3 steps of the grand staircase, his presence immediately dwarfing the officers. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer weight of his authority was palpable. "Lady Beatrice is a desperate, bankrupt liar, Inspector," Arthur replied smoothly, pulling a folded piece of heavy parchment from the inner pocket of his coat. "I did not abduct the girl. I purchased her wardship at a clandestine auction organized by Silas Cobb, an event I attended at the express, albeit unofficial, request of Lord Palmerston to investigate illegal laundering." He handed the parchment to Hawkins. It was the contract, signed by Lady Beatrice herself just hours prior, transferring all legal guardianship of Genevieve to the Duke of Harrington in exchange for £10,000. Hawkins scanned the document, his bushy eyebrows rising toward his hairline. This has her signature, Your Grace, but she claims she was coerced." "She was coerced by nothing but her own insatiable greed," Arthur sneered. "If Sir Richard wishes to pursue this matter, he may summon me to Bow Street tomorrow. However, I suggest you remind him that the Montgomery estate owes substantial back taxes to the Crown, and if Lady Beatrice wishes to invite the scrutiny of the law upon her household, I will personally ensure the Chancellor of the Exchequer audits her late husband's ledgers." The threat was implicit and devastating. Arthur was not a man one dragged into a public scandal without facing complete annihilation. Hawkins, recognizing a losing battle, returned the parchment and bowed much lower this time. "My apologies for the late hour, Your Grace. I shall inform the magistrate of your documentation." As the heavy doors closed behind the runners, Arthur exhaled a slow, controlled breath. The initial skirmish was won, but the war had merely begun. He returned to the study to find Genevieve standing exactly where he had left her, her emerald eyes wide with apprehension. "They are gone," Arthur said, walking toward his desk and pouring 2 glasses of amber brandy from a crystal decanter. He offered her one. "For now. Beatrice has realized her monumental error. She sold the vault to the very man who can protect it from her." Genevieve took the glass, her fingers brushing against his. The brief contact sent an unexpected, sharp jolt of electricity up her arm. "She will not stop, Arthur," she whispered, realizing she had dropped his title. She did not correct herself. "She has powerful friends, debts or no debts. She knows people in the House of Lords who would love to see you humiliated." "Let them try," Arthur replied, taking a sip of the burning liquid. "We have an advantage. They think you are a dim-witted, broken creature. They do not know you have washed off the soot. Therefore, we must do the absolute last thing Beatrice expects." "Which is?" "We are going to introduce you to London society," Arthur declared, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "Not as a miserable ward, but as my esteemed guest, a French heiress of impeccable lineage. I am hosting a ball in 3 weeks' time. By the time Beatrice realizes the brilliant, beautiful woman destroying her social standing is the very girl she kept in the ashes, we will have already emptied the bank vaults." Genevieve's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "A ball, society. I have spent 4 years staring at the floorboards of a kitchen. I do not know the latest dances, the gossip, the politics. You are intelligent enough to memorize a complex algorithmic cipher of prime numbers, Genevieve." Arthur stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hypnotic cadence. "You can certainly memorize the steps of a waltz. I will hire the finest tutors, the most exclusive dressmakers. You will be a weapon forged in silk and diamonds. Are you ready to fight back?" Genevieve looked up into his stormy grey eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw a man who did not view her as an obstacle, a burden, or a commodity, but as a partner. She lifted her chin, the blood of her aristocratic ancestors rushing hotly through her veins. "Show me the battlefield," she said softly. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of relentless, exhausting transformation. True to his word, Arthur transformed Harrington House into a fortress of preparation. Madame Celeste, the most exclusive and tight-lipped modiste in Mayfair, was brought in through the servants' entrance at midnight to take Genevieve's measurements. Bolts of heavy velvet, shimmering Italian silks, and delicate French lace were smuggled into the blue guest suite. But the true work happened late at night, behind the locked doors of Arthur's study. It was here, amidst the scent of burning wax and old parchment, that the true intimacy between the Duke and the ugly Duckling blossomed. Genevieve sat beside Arthur at the massive oak desk, the distance between them shrinking with every passing hour. "The funds are not held in a single location," Genevieve explained one rainy Tuesday night, her shoulder brushing against his as she leaned over a map of London. "My father was terrified of Napoleon's agents reaching across the Channel. He divided the fortune into 3 parts. Arthur traced a path on the map with a silver letter opener. "Thomas Coutts' Bank on the Strand. That much I deduced from your father's final correspondence with Lord Castlereagh. But where are the others?" Genevieve closed her eyes, accessing the vast mathematical architecture of her mind. "The sequence begins with the date of my mother's death. 17. Then the prime numbers following it. The first vault is indeed at Coutts and Company. The second is held in a private maritime lockbox under the name Peregrine at the East India Docks. The third—" She hesitated, opening her eyes to look at Arthur. "The third is not gold or currency." Arthur frowned, setting the letter opener down. "Then what is it?" "Ledgers," Genevieve whispered, realizing the dangerous gravity of her words. "My father kept records. Lady Beatrice didn't just want the money. She is being blackmailed. During the Peninsular War, Beatrice's late husband, Lord Montgomery, was not just a gambling addict. He was smuggling British naval intelligence to French privateers in exchange for paying off his debts at White's. My father discovered this. He kept the proof as an insurance policy." The silence in the study was absolute. Arthur stared at her, the political ramifications exploding in his mind. Treason. High treason against the crown. If those ledgers were made public, the Montgomery name would be erased from history, their land seized, and Beatrice would likely face the gallows, or at the very least, permanent exile. "She isn't acting alone," Arthur deduced, his jaw clenching. "A woman like Beatrice does not have the intellect to orchestrate a cover-up of this magnitude. She has a handler, a backer." "Silas Cobb," Genevieve suggested. "Cobb is a bottom feeder, a procurer," Arthur said dismissively. "No, there is someone in the House of Lords pulling her strings, someone who was also involved in the smuggling ring and is terrified your father's ledgers will expose them." He turned to look at her fully. The soft candlelight flickered across her face, highlighting the intelligent, fiercely brave woman she had become. The soot and the ashes were a distant memory. The emerald silk robe she wore clung to her curves, and for a terrifying moment, Arthur forgot about treason, banks, and politics. He was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her, the soft scent of lavender soap that lingered on her skin. Without thinking, Arthur reached out, his long fingers gently brushing a stray lock of mahogany hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, causing a violent shiver to run down Genevieve's spine. "You have carried a very heavy burden for a very long time, Genevieve," Arthur murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "But you are not carrying it alone anymore." Genevieve's breath hitched. She had spent years making herself invisible to avoid the cruelty of men. Yet here she was, desperately wishing this powerful, dangerous duke would pull her closer. "Why are you doing this, Arthur? The £10,000, the tutors, the risk. You could hang for harboring these secrets." "Because," Arthur whispered, his face inches from hers, "I despise bullies. I despise traitors. And—" He paused, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "Because I have never met a woman who possesses a fraction of your courage." He leaned in, the air between them thick with unspoken desire, but a sudden knock at the study door shattered the moment. They sprang apart, both breathing heavily. "Enter," Arthur barked, his voice slightly hoarse. It was his trusted secretary, Mr. Harrison. "Apologies for the late hour, Your Grace, but the invitations for the ball have been dispatched, and I have received a rather peculiar response." "From whom?" "Lord Stirling," Harrison said, swallowing hard. "The Earl of Westmoreland. He specifically requested that Lady Beatrice Montgomery be added to his personal guest list for the evening." Arthur's eyes met Genevieve's. The Earl of Westmoreland was one of the most powerful men in Parliament, a staunch opponent of Arthur's political faction, and a man known for his ruthless ambition. "We have found Beatrice's backer," Arthur said coldly. "The viper is coming to our own nest." The night of the Harrington ball arrived with the kind of extravagant splendor that London society would gossip about for a decade. The grand ballroom of Harrington House was transformed into a glittering wonderland. Thousands of beeswax candles burned in massive crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden glow over the imported orchids, and the string orchestra playing a lively Strauss waltz from the balcony. Carriages backed up all the way to Hyde Park as the elite of Mayfair arrived, dripping in diamonds and scandal. Arthur stood at the top of the grand staircase, greeting his guests with impeccable icy courtesy. He wore severe black evening wear, his white cravat tied with mathematical precision, the silver star of his military honors pinned to his chest. He was waiting for two specific arrivals. The first was Beatrice. She arrived on the arm of the Earl of Westmoreland, wearing a gown of garish crimson that seemed desperate for attention. When her eyes met Arthur's, she offered a smug, venomous smile, completely unaware of the trap that was springing around her. She believed Arthur was hiding her wretched ward away in an attic, ashamed of his purchase. The second arrival was the one that stopped the entire ballroom in its tracks. The orchestra seemed to falter for a fraction of a second as Genevieve appeared at the top of the staircase. She was a vision that defied description. Madame Celeste had outdone herself. Genevieve wore a gown of deep midnight blue silk that shifted in the candlelight, cut perfectly to accentuate her slender waist and the elegant slope of her shoulders. Her mahogany hair was swept up into a complex Grecian style, interwoven with delicate diamonds that Arthur had insisted she wear from the Harrington family vault. But it was her face, regal, flawless, and utterly unrecognizable from the soot-stained creature of the auction, that drew every eye. She held her head high, projecting an aura of untouchable aristocratic grace. A collective gasp echoed through the room, whispers ignited like wildfire. Who is she? A foreign princess? A visiting duchess? Arthur stepped forward, offering her his arm. "You look magnificent," he murmured, his eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive pride. "I am terrified," Genevieve whispered back, though her smile remained serene and radiant. "Do not be. You are the most powerful woman in this room." He led her down the stairs and directly onto the dance floor. The crowd parted for them as if Moses were parting the Red Sea. As they spun into the waltz, Genevieve caught sight of Lady Beatrice standing near the punch bowls. The older woman's face had drained of all colour. Her jaw hung slack, her eyes bulging as she stared at the midnight blue gown, the diamond-studded hair, and the unmistakable, aristocratic profile of the stepdaughter she had tortured for 4 years. Beatrice clutched Westmoreland's arm, whispering frantically, pointing a trembling, jewel-encrusted finger at the dance floor. "She sees you," Arthur noted, pulling Genevieve a fraction of an inch closer, the heat of his hand searing through her silk glove. "Let her stare. Tonight, we break her." The dance ended to rapturous applause. Arthur introduced Genevieve simply as Mademoiselle Genevieve, daughter of the late Henri Baptiste, watching with dark amusement as the society matrons tripped over themselves to curry favor with the mysterious French beauty. But beneath the glittering facade, a dangerous game was playing out. An hour later, Arthur was pulled away by the Prime Minister, Lord Liverpool, for a sudden, urgent political discussion regarding French tariffs. Genevieve was left momentarily alone near the terrace doors, sipping a glass of champagne. My, the ugly duckling has certainly found her swan feathers. Genevieve stiffened. She turned to find Lady Beatrice standing behind her, her face contorted with a mixture of raw hatred and disbelief. Flanking Beatrice was the Earl of Westmoreland, his eyes raking over Genevieve with predatory calculation. "Lady Beatrice," Genevieve said, her voice perfectly modulated, betraying none of the old terror, "I am surprised they let you pass the servants' entrance. I hear your credit is thoroughly exhausted." Beatrice lunged forward, but Westmoreland discreetly caught her arm, maintaining the illusion of civility for the watching crowd. "You stupid, arrogant little brat," Beatrice hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Do you think a pretty dress and a duke's patronage can save you? You belong to me. And if you do not give me the cipher to your father's vaults tonight, I will tell this entire ballroom that the Duke of Harrington bought a diseased, illegitimate gutter snipe at a black market auction." "Tell them whatever you wish," Genevieve replied coldly. "You have no power here." "I have more power than you know," Westmoreland interjected, his voice smooth and deadly. "The ledgers your father kept, Miss Genevieve, we require them, now." Before Genevieve could respond, she felt a sharp, agonizing prick in her lower back. A man in the livery of a Harrington footman had silently stepped behind her. He held a small silver syringe, the needle pressing through her silk gown. "Do not scream," Westmoreland whispered, smiling pleasantly for the crowd. "It is a potent derivative of laudanum. You will simply feel faint, and we will escort you to a waiting carriage to recover. Walk with us quietly, or the next injection goes into your neck." The room began to tilt. The golden light of the chandeliers fractured into spinning stars. Genevieve's knees buckled slightly, but Westmoreland and the fake footman caught her arms, making it appear as though she had merely swooned. Panic seized her throat, but her voice failed her. They were dragging her out through the terrace doors, into the cold, dark gardens, away from the light, away from Arthur. Arthur excused himself from Lord Liverpool the moment he felt a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest. He scanned the crowded ballroom. Genevieve was gone. His eyes swept the perimeter, locking onto the terrace doors left slightly ajar, the velvet curtains swaying in the cold night breeze. All military protocol, all polite society manners evaporated instantly. The Duke of Harrington became the ruthless soldier who had survived the bloodiest battles of the continent. He shoved past an indignant duchess, sprinting across the floor and bursting through the terrace doors. The cold air hit him, but he barely felt it. In the distance, near the labyrinthine hedges of the garden, he saw 3 figures moving rapidly toward the back service gate. "Genevieve!" Arthur roared, his voice shattering the elegant tranquillity of the Mayfair night. At the gate, Westmoreland cursed. "Get her in the carriage! Hurry!" The fake footman tried to lift Genevieve's limp body, but the laudanum had made her a dead weight. Arthur closed the distance with terrifying speed. He did not bother with warnings or aristocratic dueling etiquette. As he reached them, he grabbed the fake footman by the collar of his livery and violently hurled him backward into the stone wall of the estate. The man crumpled, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Westmoreland, panicking, drew a small silver-plated pistol from his coat. "Stay back, Harrington! This is not your affair!" Arthur didn't even break his stride. With a fluid, blindingly fast motion, he swung his silver-tipped cane, striking Westmoreland's wrist with a sickening crack. The pistol discharged into the dirt as Westmoreland shrieked in agony, dropping to his knees, cradling his shattered arm. Lady Beatrice stood frozen in the moonlight, her face a mask of absolute terror. Arthur ignored them both. He dropped to his knees, gathering Genevieve into his arms. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow, but she looked up at him, a weak, drug-laced smile touching her lips. You ruined your cravat," she mumbled softly, resting her head against his chest. "I have dozens of them," Arthur replied, his voice shaking with a potent mixture of adrenaline and overwhelming relief. He pulled her tight against his chest, burying his face in her hair. The garden was suddenly flooded with light and noise. Inspector Hawkins, along with half a dozen Bow Street runners, swarmed the gate, accompanied by Arthur's own armed estate guards. "Arrest them," Arthur commanded, his eyes burning with lethal fury as he looked at Beatrice and the weeping Earl. "Lord Westmoreland and Lady Beatrice Montgomery. The charge is high treason, attempted murder, and conspiracy against the Crown. My secretary has already delivered the late Henri Baptiste's ledgers to the Prime Minister. Their smuggling rings are exposed." Beatrice screamed as the runners clamped heavy iron cuffs onto her wrists, dragging her kicking and sobbing toward the carriage she had meant for Genevieve. Arthur carried Genevieve back into the warmth of the house, bypassing the shocked whispers of the ballroom, carrying her straight up the grand staircase to his private chambers. He laid her gently on the massive four-poster bed, summoning Mrs. Hughes to tend to her. It took 2 days for the laudanum to fully leave her system. When Genevieve finally awoke with a clear head, she found herself in Arthur's bed, the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Arthur was asleep in a chair beside the bed, still wearing the trousers and rumpled shirt from the night of the ball. He looked exhausted, his usually impeccable appearance entirely discarded. Genevieve reached out, her fingers gently brushing against his rough, unshaven cheek. Arthur's eyes snapped open instantly. When he saw she was awake and alert, a profound softness overtook his harsh features. He slid from the chair onto the edge of the bed, taking her hand and pressing a desperate kiss to her knuckles. "The ledgers?" she asked, her voice raspy. "In the hands of the Crown," Arthur assured her softly. "Westmoreland is in the Tower of London awaiting trial for treason. Beatrice has been stripped of her titles, her property seized by the Crown, and she faces permanent exile to a penal colony. The Montgomery estate is dissolved. Your father's funds, safely held at Coutts, are entirely yours. You are free, Genevieve. You are a phenomenally wealthy, independent woman." Genevieve looked at him, the reality of her total victory settling over her. She had won. The ugly duckling had orchestrated the downfall of her abusers and reclaimed her empire. She could go anywhere in the world. She could buy her own estate, employ her own servants, and never answer to anyone again. Yet, as she looked into Arthur's stormy grey eyes, She realized the vast fortunes and the titles meant nothing compared to the warmth of the hand holding hers. "I am free to go?" she asked quietly, testing the waters. "You are," Arthur said, though the words seemed to physically pain him. He looked away, his jaw clenching. "The contract we signed was a ruse to protect you. I will have my lawyers draft the dissolution papers. You may establish your own residence whenever you are ready." Genevieve smiled. She shifted closer to him, her fingers reaching up to cup his face, forcing him to look back at her. "Arthur Sterling," she whispered, her emerald eyes shining with unapologetic love. "You paid £10,000 for me. You are a businessman, and I am a French heiress who knows the value of a solid investment. I have absolutely no intention of leaving, unless you are telling me you do not want the prize you won at the auction." Arthur's breath hitched. The walls he had built around his heart during the wars, the icy facade of the formidable Duke, finally shattered completely. "I want nothing else in this world," he confessed, his voice breaking. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of absolute devotion, desperate relief, and the burning promise of a shared future. It was a kiss that erased years of soot and sorrow, sealing a partnership forged in fire and absolute trust. The scandal of the Harrington ball became the stuff of London legend, a cautionary tale whispered in drawing rooms for generations. Lady Beatrice's ruin was absolute, her name stricken from polite society, while the Earl of Westmoreland met his disgraced end in the damp cells of the Tower. However, the true legacy of that fateful night was the formidable union between the Duke and Duchess of Harrington. Genevieve did not merely survive her horrific past, she weaponized her brilliant mind, becoming one of the wealthiest and most influential political hostesses in England. Together, Arthur and Genevieve built an empire built not on transactional wagers, but on an unshakable, fiercely protective love. The aristocrats who had once laughed at the soot-covered girl in the clandestine basement learned a brutal, permanent lesson. Never underestimate the deadly grace of a survivor, and never provoke a duke who has finally found his queen. Their romance remained a beacon of defiant triumph, a love story etched in history.